afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Commission on the State of Hate's second community forum of 2025. Closed captioning is available for this meeting. The closed captions can be displayed in English or another language, which will allow you to view an automated live transcript of the meeting in another language. To display closed captions on your screen, please do the following. Click the button labeled Show Captions at the bottom of your Zoom window. Select the box at the bottom of the window labeled Enable Translation. When you see you've enabled translation at the top, select English as the speaking language and select your preferred language in the second menu. Click Save. Automated captions in your selected language should start appearing at the bottom of the Zoom window. To access the interpreter channel, click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a little globe. Select Spanish. After selecting your language, you will automatically switch to the interpreter's channel for that language. If you wish to return to the main meeting audio, click the interpretation icon again and select Off. I thank you for joining us today. My name is Regina Cuellar, and I'm the chairwoman of the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, and I'm also a seated commissioner on the Commission of the State of Hate. I will be your moderator today for today's forum, and I welcome you all. The Commission on the State of Hate was established to strengthen California's efforts to stop hate and promote mutual respect amongst California's diverse communities. The Commission is charged with researching and publishing information on hate activity, hosting community forums, and providing resources and guidance on how to reduce and respond to hate activity. The community forums, like the forum here today, are part of that effort to offer resources to those that are experiencing hate. But most importantly, it is to learn and hear directly from you, the public, and how you can help inform this commission in our work and to reduce and respond to hate. So please, I encourage everyone here today to speak up and let your voice be heard. Together, we can fight hate and make California a safe place for everyone. I'd like to take this time to introduce the commissioners that we have joining us today. First of all, my name is Commissioner Cuellar. I will be moderating today's forum, and with me helping today will be Commissioner Cece Filer. She will be moderating the public comment section of today's forum. And with us, we have Commissioner Che, Commissioner Suthers, and last but not least is our chair of the commission, Chair Levin. So thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin the presentations, we want to remind you that if you are a victim or a witness to hate, racism, or bullying, you can report and receive free support through the California versus Hate resource line and network. Trained agents on the hotline will help you identify next steps and help connect you to resources including legal, financial, mental health, and mediation services. Anyone can report anonymously, and your report will not be shared with law enforcement without your consent unless required by law. Report hate by calling 833-8-NO-HATE or visiting caversushate.org. We'll put the link to California versus Hate in the chat. We also want to remind you about the free services available for communities throughout the California Civil Rights Department's Community Conflict Resolution Units. If your community is experiencing heightened fear, conflict, or tension because of discriminatory practices, hate incidents, or hate crimes, the Community Conflict Resolution Unit may be able to assist. CREW offers a range of conflict resolution services to help communities effectively address hate and discrimination-based community conflict. All CREW services are free, voluntary, and confidential. CREW services can be requested by completing the request for service form online and emailing the form to ccru@calcivilrights.ca.gov. We'll put the contact information for CREW in the chat. I'd like to move on to reviewing the process for public comment. First, the commission is a public body, and an important part of being a public body is hearing from the public. There will be opportunities for public comments throughout the meeting today. To keep an orderly meeting, please make sure to comment only on the agenda item under consideration. If you have a comment that are not specifically related to an agenda item, Please save your comment for the agenda item titled Public Comment on Items Not on the Agenda. To submit a written public comment, email the commission at csh@calcivilrights.ca.gov. We'll put the email address in the chat. For everyone in the room today, you may submit a written comment by emailing us or by writing your comment on a piece of paper and handing it to Erin. If you submit a written comment that pertains to an agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it when the public comment portion of that agenda item is open. If the comment is not about a specific agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it at the end of the meeting during the agenda item, public comment on items not on the agenda. If you would like to speak at the meeting to deliver your public comment, you will have the opportunity to do so during the public comment portions of the meeting. At the end of our presentations, we will ask if there's any public comment. We will begin with people in the room with us today and then move on to public comment on Zoom. If you are joining us on Zoom, you may request to speak on an agenda item by raising your hand virtually on Zoom. To do so on a computer, please raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. In the interest of time, we will limit verbal public comment to 1 minute per person. If you require translation or accommodation, we will grant additional time. As you consider your comments today, we want to encourage you to keep a few things in mind. Everyone is encouraged to participate. The foundation of our work is community input, and we want to encourage you to speak up and have your voice heard. We appreciate the diversity of perspectives. This forum was designed to support learning together and the creation of shared understanding. Everyone brings kernels of wisdom based on their own unique history and experiences. We can't know or understand what someone else thinks unless we listen to them. Therefore, when someone says something that challenges your thinking, we encourage you to listen, to understand why they think as they do. Please maintain a respectful space. Everyone is deserving of respect. That means I encourage everyone to treat each other with kindness and respect today, even if we may disagree. We are very fortunate to have a fantastic slate of speakers today. However, I want to note that the information presented today does not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or the California Civil Rights Department. So to start our forum today, we have our first presentation, and the topic of today's presentation is Dialogue Across Differences. Our first speaker, UCLA, is Badari Kindness Institute. And Maya Ferdman is the Deputy Director of the UCLA Badari Kindness Institute and the Initiative to Study Hate. She is also the Staff Director of the Dialogue Across Difference Initiative. Maya is a dedicated bridge builder and educator. Throughout her career, Maya has developed numerous interfaith programs, trained government and nonprofit groups in cultural competency, and facilitated conversations across differences about topics including policy, homelessness, and racial equity. Thank you, Maya, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Can everybody hear me? I just got the notification my connection was unstable, so that's the worst thing you want to hear right before you start to present. So just let me know if it cuts out at any point. But it is really a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Maya Ferdman. I am the Deputy Director of the Badari Kindness Institute, as Commissioner Cuellar said, and I am going to go ahead and share my slides. So just a word about the Institute and a little bit more context for who I am. The Badari Kindness Institute is a multidisciplinary research hub at UCLA dedicated to the research and practice of kindness. So we support research from across all the disciplines of the university that seeks to understand how kindness is cultivated and how it can be infused into the way we relate to one another and the way our systems work. And I'll say that we have two major initiatives under the umbrella of that institute, which are the Initiative to Study Hate, which has been a wonder. We've loved to partner with the Commission on the State of Hate for the last 2 years on different research efforts. as well as the Dialogue Across Difference initiative, of which I'm the staff director. And I'll share more about that initiative a little bit later, later in the presentation. But I'll say I'm primarily here to give us a broad frame to understand what we even mean when we say dialogue across difference. I'll also use the terminology of bridge building, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. And I'm going to give you the case to one contributor of the problem that we seek to address. Because we want to start with what are we actually trying to do when we talk about dialogue across difference. And that is the problem of polarization. So many of us know this, that political polarization has ballooned over the past decade, but has been steadily increasing over the last multiple decades, to the point where Americans are more polarized in the last 10 years or so than any time since the Civil War. And in some ways, this is about our political ideologies becoming sorted by party. In other words, based on your party affiliation, you would know how someone votes on issue A through Z, which wasn't actually always the case. This has changed over time. But beyond that ideological or political polarization, there's been an increase, a marked increase in what is called affective polarization, which is the notion that not only do we just vote or think differently, but rather we actively are starting to increasingly dislike and distrust people who are different from us. So there's many polls that have demonstrated this. For instance, in 2022, a Pew study showed that about 2/3 of both Democrats and Republicans said that members of the other party are immoral and a threat to our nation's well-being. Right, so we've seen this increase over time where people who are different from us are not just opponents politically, but enemies. And of course, that has a range of dangerous consequences. On one level, if we can't work together, we can't solve problems, right? Our relationships begin to get frayed. We see how this leads to gridlock. But of course, on another level, on the macro level, if our opponent is our enemy, we can more easily justify violence against them. It can fuel hate against them. Very timely and relevant for this commission. And I want to name, I'm focused here, I'm speaking about political differences, but we've seen and felt viscerally the way toxicity around difference in general can seep into every aspect of our lives. It's not just about Republican and Democrat, right? It's about differences writ large, that we're experiencing this kind of breakage societally, these kinds of tears. And so there's something important, though, and really significant about the nature of this polarization, which is we are often operating with what are called huge perception gaps about the political other. Researchers have found that Democrats and Republicans alike overestimate the extreme views of the other side by a wide margin. So we often guess that the other side is going to be a lot further on one end or the other on any given issue than they actually are. And something even more interesting here is that the more educated somebody is and the more that person consumes media, the wider their perception gaps, which is kind of a counterintuitive data point. It shows that our media ecosystems are not doing us any favors here. And so on one level, this perception gap is a problem, right? We are experiencing toxicity based on misunderstandings and misperceptions of one another. But on the other hand, it can present an opportunity to us, that it shows us that that toxicity that we experience when charge difference is present, the way that that toxicity has the potential to devolve into violence and hate, that is not a given, right? It is not inherent that in a diverse and pluralistic society, you would necessarily have toxicity and polarization. But actually, there is another way. And so that brings me into bridge building. And I want to say I'm using the term bridge building as a sort of even broader term than dialogue across difference, but I often just in my own vernacular use them kind of interchangeably, and I'm happy to share more about that But I use bridge building as kind of a broader approach. And I'll say, here's the definition I'll give for bridge building, which is a family or collection of skill sets, approaches, and frameworks that aim to increase our individual and collective capacity to resolve conflict, to work and dialogue across our differences, and to lead empathically and effectively. So this definition is something that I came up with along with a group of bridge building colleagues here in Los Angeles, which actually includes Elisa Barrett, who's another presenter on this call, which is meant to be encompassing of many different kinds of approaches to navigating the differences and the divisions in society today. There's other terms of reference that people use to refer to these families of approaches, depending on their particular slice of the pie. So you might hear things like social cohesion or dialogue or civil discourse, intergroup relations, conflict resolution, conflict transformation. There's so many different terms of reference that we use, which often can make it very confusing. And so that's why I'm referring to this family of skill sets to help us navigate and understand what the differences are. And so I want to just say, when we're thinking about what it means to be in a pluralistic democracy, what does it mean to be in a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilinguistic, multi-faceted state like California? The skill and capacity to navigate our differences with empathy, with efficacy, with resilience and skill is essential to what it means to function at any level, whether we're talking at the state and government level, or whether we're talking at an institutional or organizational level, or even just if we're talking to our family members who we disagree with, right? And here I have a quote from Professor John Powell from Berkeley, from UC Berkeley, who directs the Othering and Belonging Institute. And he often writes extensively about the power of bridging to combat othering, to combat those misperceptions, right? And that toxicity that results from misperception, to foster an increased sense of belonging, both in communities and organizations around the world. So I want to just say one last thing. We see this, at least in my perspective, the capacities related to bridge building treat difference not just as a thing to overcome or work around, but rather as a potential, as an opportunity for growth. That difference is actually, if we know how to navigate them fully, can become a strength for us. So if that is what bridge building is, what do bridge builders do? I want to share a few of the potential outcomes or goals that some people might be sitting with as a way to understand what types of bridge building practices or frameworks can be useful, right? This is a recognition that there's many different reasons why we may want to engage in a dialogue across difference. There's many reasons why we might want to build bridging skills. And I'll just say, this is not an exhaustive list by any means. This is just meant to demonstrate potential goals and the various frameworks that might apply to those different needs. So for instance, maybe someone wants to improve democratic processes and promote democratic norms. I think Commissioner Cuellar was just referencing, right, that even in this meeting, we want to hear and promote and understand differences, that people come to a public meeting with differences. And so maybe a commissioner who's part of a public meeting might want to improve the ability to navigate those differences or to hold difference in a meeting setting or in a town hall. Maybe you're a decision maker or an elected official, and you want to understand how to navigate the differences in among your constituents in order to move forward. Maybe you want to solve a civic problem, right, using democratic practices. Maybe you want to build relationships in a community. Maybe you want to reduce animosity and hate across lines of difference. Or maybe you want to rally a community around a shared goal, but the community is incredibly diverse and you need something to bring them together. And maybe you want to do so in ways that foster a sense of belonging. Maybe you have a goal to address a harm that has happened in a workplace or in a community, or to resolve a specific conflict that is going on. You want to reach some kind of agreement, some kind of outcome. Or maybe you want to foster increased understanding between people. foster a culture of dialogue in an organization, reduce polarization in general as sort of a broad aspiration that can kind of cut across all of these other goals. But you want to generate sort of a broad culture. So these are, again, just a couple of potential goals that someone might be sitting with. Then the question becomes, how can bridge building help address and meet these goals? So I'm just, again, this is, I'm going to name a range of different frameworks and approaches that may or may not sound a little jargony if you're not familiar with them, but that's okay. The idea is these are meant to be sort of showing you the various ways that bridge building exists at different levels of society and of our state also. So for instance, a multi-stakeholder process, that ability to say, how are we going to design this town hall such that different voices can be heard? Deliberative decision making. We have to think about things like redistricting or homelessness or whatever else. How do we deliberate with one another in ways that are constructive? Maybe we're teaching kids civic leadership and we want to show them multiple narratives, or we want to model what debate looks like. All of these things can help improve democratic processes. Intergroup contact is one of the main sort of well-known approaches to reducing animosity and hate across groups. But coalition building, the different strategies that are used to build coalitions and allies across lines of difference. Maybe there's also, well, this is an important one, that actually there's some forms of bridge building that require an outcome, right? And there's some forms of bridge building that do not, that sometimes the outcome is just let's understand one another, or let's have an educational experience. And sometimes you actually want to come to a resolution. So mediation, and there's different kinds of mediation, can produce that. Restorative practices, which I know you'll probably hear about in a little bit in more depth, provide an opportunity to address harm. And then there's all sorts of different kinds of approaches to dialogue. We can build a culture of dialogue through skill building, through muscle building, and I'll share more about that, how we're doing that at UCLA in a minute. So these are all different fields of practice that fit into this family, into this umbrella of what bridge building is. And so when we think about dialogue across difference and designing for dialogue across difference, we have to first think about what is the goal that we're trying to achieve, and then think about what are the different frameworks or approaches that could help us, that could be utilized in service of that goal. So I'll close with a short case study to illustrate a little bit about what I'm talking about with the UCLA Dialogue Across Difference Initiative and where it came from and what we're doing. So this initiative was first conceived of by our Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost, Darnell Hunt, in January of 2023. So this was based out of a recognition that it was becoming increasingly difficult on an institutional level to talk to one another on a very basic level, and the desire to advance the values of active listening, empathy, intellectual engagement, humility, critical thinking across lines of difference. And beyond that doing so is actually part and parcel of our educational mission at UCLA, that this is what it means to engage in higher education. And so a faculty committee conceived of 4 major prongs of engagement in order to infuse those values and those skill sets and practices into how we do our business at UCLA. Our goal was to build a culture of dialogue. And so we came up with a series of different programmatic entry points into doing so. We had planned, and this is an important historical point, the plan was to launch this program, launch this initiative publicly in October of 2023. Of course, October 7th and all of its aftermath led to we realized that this was not the moment to launch publicly, that this is meant to be a proactive approach. And so we launched in a sort of a quiet way and started ramping up our work bit by bit. But as we were doing so, our campus experienced enormous fracture and a disintegration of trust at every level of the university. We experienced protests and even violence. Students experienced violence on our campus in the spring of 2024, and demand really spiked for the spaces and the skills to navigate what was an increasingly fraught environment. And so that's when we ended up coming under the wing of the Bidari Kindness Institute and becoming formalized and expanding our offerings significantly. So we do our work in a variety of ways. We offer an internship, a student internship, and other student leadership opportunities to engage with the practices of dialogue, as well as a fund, a Bridge Builders Fund, a Bruin Bridge Builders Fund, if you will, with opportunities for students to either learn about bridging skills or run programs in their, in their dorms or in their apartments or on campus in different ways from the grassroots. We have teaching opportunities for faculty to either create one-unit seminars where dialogue across difference is a thematic point, whether either in form or in content, where they can teach across lines of difference in the classroom, as well as a fellowship for faculty to learn how to do this. What does it mean to infuse the classroom with the skills for navigating our differences? We have a public program series, a series called Compassionate Conversations, where we bring speakers who model what it means to hold compassion in the face of difference, and to fight hate also. As well, we are also mapping out what are the existing capacities on our campus. I mean, we have experts in the School of Law, in the School of Education, in the School of Medicine, in the School of Business, who have a piece of the pie, right? Who have a different kind of framework that they specialize in. And so we're trying to map that out to be able to understand how do we support and uplift many different approaches to navigating difference. And finally, we are supporting folks with the skills to engage across difference, facilitate across difference, and convene across difference. We have a partnership with the national nonprofit Resetting the Table, which really is an expert in the concrete skill for having these kinds of conversations across charge difference. We provide workshops for everyone from our vice chancellors to our, just yesterday, I did a training with all of our RAs and our student life, residential life student staff, and we're trying to expand our capacity to do this. And so really what we're trying to do at UCLA is create a shared language for navigating our differences, and as well as foster more spaces to practice and advance the values and the skill sets to do this, which, in reference back to what I said earlier, this is part of that goal of building a culture of dialogue. And so we're trying to uplift many different kinds of methodologies and approaches and frameworks to navigating our differences. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you so much, Maya, for your very informative presentation, and thank you for all the great work that you're heading at UCLA. Thank you so much for that. Before we move on to our next presentation, I'd like to acknowledge Commissioner Roybal, who joined us. So thank you so much for joining us, Commissioner Roybal. Next, our second presenter is with the Western Justice Center. Alyssa Barrett is the Executive Director of the Western Justice Center, where she brings decades of leadership as a legal innovator and advocate for justice. Her career spans impactful work from securing housing rights to advancing international human rights and LGBTQ protections. As a frequent speaker and published voice on access to justice, Elisa is committed to building bridges across difference through law, policy, and community engagement. Thank you, Alyssa, for being here today.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuellar. It's lovely to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Elisa Barrett. My pronouns are she, her, ella. It's lovely to be with you all. I'm going to share and start my presentation. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Justice Center. We work mostly in the Southern California area, but we have a website that's accessed by more than 45,000 users around the world every year. Our work is really about empowering the next generation of bridge builders. And thank you to my friend and colleague, Maya Ferdman, for helping us set that context with those definitions. I'm going to have a number of slides throughout this presentation because this work of bridge building is inherently interactive. I know we're not able to do that directly in the chat, but I'd like to offer these questions as things for you to ponder during the presentation. So the first set of questions I have for you is, when was the last time you engaged in dialogue with someone whose views were very different from your own? And what was the context of that dialogue? Food for thought. At Western Justice Center, our mission is to empower people to strengthen their communities by growing the conflict resolution skills and capacity of youth, educators, schools, and community partners. And this essentially comes down to equipping young people with the tools to manage conflict, reduce violence, navigate complexity, and embrace their differences in order to positively affect their future. And if we're all being honest, our own as well. Here are a few photos from our annual Youth Peace Building Summit that involves about 600 to 700 students in LA each February. A lot of what we do in this K through 12 educational environment is create a practical roadmap for using restorative tools in the educational setting. It's very important that the work happens around policy and in research to look at ways to address behavior and differences that arise in education outside of traditional punitive discipline. But things often fall short when we get to the phase of practical implementation on a school campus. And so what we talk about is the restorative practices continuum, and we're looking for what we call the 80-20 rule. So a lot of what you see here, developing the ability to get I statements, doing community building circles, being able to circle up from an impromptu dialogue, doing more intentional healing circles, addressing a harm, going into mediation and restorative case conferencing. Really, we want to be doing as many of these activities around prevention as we can. And as Maya said, developing the muscles and the memory and the skill sets that allow us to effectively navigate our differences. Here's my second question. When you think of your hopes for the next generation of bridge builders, what words come to mind? So for us at the Western Justice Center, partnership is really everything. We don't do one and done trainings. We're not in and out. Most of our partnerships in LA right now, and we're in the middle of a 50 school build that is the largest comprehensive conflict resolution education project in the state. It will involve more than 25,000 students at its peak. And really what we're doing is we're coming in and we're working for 5 to 10 years with an entire school district. Right now we're in 3 districts and about to launch our 4th. And we come in and we say, look, we're experts in this wonderful toolbox of things called conflict resolution education. And thank you to Maya again for naming some of those pieces. But also we have to say our partners are experts in everything else in their communities. And I think when you come in to do work with people, if you don't have respect for their expertise, it's very difficult to build trust, right? So we want to rely on the community for their knowledge of communal dynamics, things happening with individual students and families, and also delivery of services. And we worked collaboratively to build a model that can work in practice, and then we adjust that and learn from our efforts as we're going. So this is really like a living laboratory of doing dialogue across difference at a scaled level. Some more photos of our students and our teachers. Importantly, we're finally reaching this stage in our work, and we have a research partnership with the Educational Leadership Department at Cal Poly Pomona, where we're starting to see some longitudinal evidence come in. Our cornerstone partnership is with Azusa Unified in the San Gabriel Valley. We're in our 6th year of partnership with them. We've been slowly training up all 300 plus staff certificated and classified in the district, and also training up students from kindergarten through 12th grade in these practices of bridge building. Here's some of what we're seeing. Chronic absenteeism rates are down dramatically. If you are a young person and you feel that you are not valued for the wholeness of who you are, or you are bullied and you encounter hate speech or a hate incident that goes unaddressed, and on top of everything else going on in your world, you're not going to come to school. And so we're seeing a real reversal of chronic absenteeism rates. We're also seeing, as these practices around bridge building get integrated into instructional strategies, we're seeing increase in academic performance. Azusa uses something called the Youth Truth Survey, and the sense of trust and belonging in the district is up by 25%. Importantly, also suspensions are down by 60%. So we're not waiting until behavior reaches a point where our only options are punitive or exclusionary. We're dealing with it differently and focusing on student supportive services and student needs. We're also seeing a decreased reliance on law enforcement needing to come on campus. Okay, another question for you. What skills do you think are most important for the next generation of bridge builders? Just things to ponder. Thank you again to Maya for talking about the skills around bridge building. And we think of this in two categories: peace building and peacekeeping. So that 80% of the work is the peace building. It is using restorative circles, not just when there's a problem, but to build trust and connection and belonging between students. I remember one training we had with a district's leader on STEM education. She was a math specialist, and she had a colleague with her who was a chemistry teacher. And they both were like, what in the world does any of this have to do with students succeeding in the sciences? And by the end of the training and then working with those folks back in the classroom, they're like, oh, well, I invested this time in helping the students build connections with each other. And then when we got to project-based learning, we were able to move much more quickly. Also, the students weren't as reluctant to work in projects, even if they were working with students that were very different from them, including students that had different gang affiliations. Peacekeeping is really, as Maya referenced again, youth-led mediation and other practices. I want to talk about that restorative approach because I think it's a very understandable instinct when there's a hate incident to respond with a form of punishment for the person who committed the act. But our position is that we do need that student to be accountable for their actions, but we want to do it in a way that's a little bit more holistic. And so when we take that punitive approach, we're asking ourselves some of these questions, what rule was broken? Who broke it? How are we going to punish them? And an institution is meting out the punishment, and we're focused on consequences rather than repair. In a restorative approach, we're really asking what happened? What is going on with the student? Who has been affected? How are we going to collectively address the harm that's happened? And how do we get to a place of either peaceful coexistence or actual reconciliation and repair? I just want to say another piece quickly about student-led peer mediation. Again, you're seeing in these different presentations very similar skill sets, right? All of these things around emotional self-awareness and self-management, active listening, cultural competency, collaborative brainstorming, trying to reach a mutually agreed upon resolution. These are skills that don't just help students in the context of that K through 12 educational journey. I think one can make the salient argument that to have a functioning, pluralistic, multiracial democracy, to have a just and civil society, we need many of these tools to be infused in the people who make up that society and have us the confidence and the fluency to bring them to bear in our personal and our civic lives. I want to say this, what has been really exciting is to see training up, and we've trained and mobilized about 4,000 students and teachers over the last 3 years alone, that the school culture and climate can shift very dramatically when we equip young people with these tools, and where we get the adults on board around them. And we're seeing this very evidently in the way the communities we work with are responding to hate incidents. And I want to give a couple of examples on the individual response to hate incidents. I want to give 2 examples. One involving mediation and one involving restorative circles. The mediation example was a student who was very close to graduating high school. He defaced a school laptop with swastikas and used race-based language against a teacher. And the school's initial response was to decide that he was not going to walk at graduation and to expel him, which would have had very far-reaching implications for his life. And we were brought in, we co-led a mediation with some teachers and students that we had trained. And we were able to really have the student and the teacher talk about how this action had impacted them, and where, for the student, where did this come from? What were the choices that were behind these actions? And for the teacher to describe what a betrayal of trust it was for them to have had this happen. And they were able to work it through, design some amends for the students to make, and the student was able to walk at graduation. I want to give the second example, involved cyberbullying and race-based hate speech on social media. This involved some 5th graders. We decided with the school to co-facilitate a restorative circle with students who felt targeted by the language and the students who had posted the language. Let me tell you, the initial email thread was all about suspending and expelling the students. And then everyone paused, said, wait, we think we have a different way to do this. And so this was really, a restorative circle is really a structure for intentional dialogue. And the students who were affected were able to describe the impact that that language and the postings had on them. And the students who posted it were able to share where they heard it and why they posted it. And together, this group of students created a new set of social norms that they wanted to follow together, that ultimately they presented to the principal and began to advocate for them to be adopted school-wide. So that's kind of a bridge into how does individual action turn into collective action? And I'll give 2 examples on this as well, and then we're almost done. Individually, we, in our pilot project in Azusa, before the start of the pandemic, we trained about a dozen middle school students to serve as mediators. And they chose to do both formal mediations and informal mediations, or we might know them as de-escalations. The assistant principal said, you know, if you could help me, there's all this drama around the girls' bathroom. And so the mediator said, well, we're going to check it out and see what's going on there. They came and they reported back to the assistant principal, and they said, look, first of all, we're very offended by the phrase girl drama, and we find it sexist. And second of all, what's actually going on in the girls' bathroom is a drug-based vape trade. And we would actually like you to create a drug and alcohol amnesty program, a drug and weapon amnesty program, and provide treatment options, because there are students starting in 6th grade that are already grappling with these issues. And this is not just, you know, a girl fight. This is a very serious issue that's happening in the school environment, and we need you to do something systemic about it. My last example is at the high school level. Many schools coming out of the pandemic had decreasing enrollment and were dealing with school consolidation. So one of the districts we work in was consolidating 2 different high schools. Each was geographic territory for a separate gang. There were a series of shootings. Several students were killed at the high school level. And the students at those 2 high schools reached out to each other and decided, and this was a gang killing context in which people were being targeted because of their racial or ethnic identity. between the two different gangs. The students came together and they said, look, the adults are not solving this problem, and we are tired of losing our friends, and we are tired of waiting. And we've been learning these community building circle skills with the Western Justice Center, and we're wondering if we can use that to do some organizing of our fellow high school students. And they began a listening campaign. And from that was formed a student union. They created a student bill of rights. They're now in their third year. We have a retreat with them that we host at our campus in Pasadena every year. They are now launching their first college credit classes in conflict resolution and restorative justice. They have created a mentoring program where the older class members mentor the freshmen and the sophomores, and the high school students mentor the middle school students, and the middle school students mentor the elementary school students. And they've even put on citywide resource fairs and advocated for curriculum change to become more inclusive in their district. So I think what we're trying to touch on is that we start from the place of dialogue being, as Maya said, a thing that we have to overcome our differences around. And really, we're trying to reframe that as these are things that are opportunities for growth, healing, and the practice of democracy, small d. So I'd love to send you away with the last couple set of questions. What made an impression and or resonated with you that we shared today? And what are you sitting with, or what questions do you have? I invite you to use this QR code to follow us on LinkedIn. We're active on LinkedIn and Insta. Don't have a TikTok channel yet. Or you can visit us at our website at westernjustice.org. Thank you very, very much. It's a real privilege to be before this body. Your work as a commission is extremely important. And we look forward to partnering with you all more in the future.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, for your wonderful, wonderful presentation. And thank you for all the great work you're doing with our youth. Very much needed. And I love seeing all the pictures of the youth. So thank you so much for that presentation. So our last presentation is going to be by the Interfaith Speakers Bureau. And we have two presenters with us today. Our first presenter is Maha Al-Jannati, and I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. She is a leading expert in combating Islamophobia, with over 30 years of experience delivering education and training on interfaith relations, workplace inclusion, and strategies to counter bias. Karen Stiller is a recognized specialist in addressing anti-Semitism with extensive experience in intercultural education, diversity training, and guiding organizations in building inclusive and equitable workplace cultures. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And I wanted to thank Maya and Alyssa for their wonderful presentations, and would love to actually get their evaluations of the program that we're about to present to all of you. And hopefully this could be sort of a case study that they could potentially use for their program. So I'm going to start by telling you all a little bit about the Interfaith Speakers Bureau. It actually began with dialogue across difference between Muslims and Jews. Exactly 20 years ago, in 2005, our communities saw each other only through the lens of conflict in the Middle East, and therefore there wasn't much interaction. So my organization, the Islamic Networks Group, brought a group of Muslims and Jews together who represented their organized mainstream communities and asked a simple question of the group that we convened. The question was, as the two largest religious minorities in America, is there anything that we can do together here in the United States outside of that conflict in the Middle East? And the answer was a resounding yes. We realized that we could focus on the challenges that we share here at home. We recognized right away that combating Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, strengthening security, and building inclusion were priorities that we held in common. And out of that realization, our very first Muslim-Jewish panel was born. And before long, we grew to include other faith communities as well within about a year. And today, the Interfaith Speakers Bureau brings together Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, and other groups. And we highlight the richness of each of our traditions and cultures, while also lifting up the values that we share. And through personal storytelling in classrooms, workplaces, law enforcement agencies, civic spaces, we challenge stereotypes, we deepen understanding, we build respect, and share very tailored, practical strategies for inclusion of all of the groups that are represented on these panels.
So I've been a speaker for the Interfaith Speakers Bureau for about 15 years, and it's really been an amazing experience. The beginning of the Interfaith Speakers Bureau was really actually a grassroots effort. We had members of each one of the communities represented working together to build the content on our community-held yet very diverse beliefs, practices, and values. And I believe that when we do this work together in partnership, it adds a lot of value to all of the work that we do individually, especially during a time of tremendous polarization, like right now, where people are not able to talk to each other across political differences. When we appear together, it's modeling really what civil discourse and allyship could and should look like. And in fact, when we do joint presentations on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, one of the most frequent comments that we get is how much people just, simply appreciate that we're like there together, the two of us. And it's something that they really aspire to do within their own institution. And I'll just add, like, from a personal note, that during increased times of conflict and tension, such as these last couple of years, like for me, the Speakers Bureau has really been a lovely place of refuge.
That's beautiful. I just want to add to what Karen said, that standing together also signals not only solidarity, but also the recognition that our struggles, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, are very much interconnected. They're not isolated forms of bigotry. They're often fueled by the same forces of ignorance, fear, and hate. The same individuals and movements that vilify one community often target the other as well, most notably within the Great Replacement hate movement that some of you may be familiar with. So by addressing these issues together, we reinforce each other's efforts, making our training stronger and more credible. It demonstrates that, in my opinion, that confronting one form of bigotry without addressing the other is incomplete. Perhaps most importantly, this partnership compels our communities, both our communities in particular, to listen to one another. So there are Americans who may not fully grasp the reality of anti-Semitism. I've learned a lot in the last 2 years listening to our Jewish speakers, including Karen. They may assume that anti-Semitism is less significant than Islamophobia. Similarly, there are other Americans who may not recognize Islamophobia as a very serious and pervasive problem. So when we sit together on these panels, we challenge those assumptions by speaking from lived experiences. Hearing directly from one another builds empathy, corrects misconceptions, and creates space for deeper understanding. And this mutual recognition transforms the work from defensive advocacy into a shared pursuit of justice and inclusion, where, as Karen said, our unity then becomes a model for others facing division.
Yeah, and I think this is especially true when presenting together in places like schools and workplaces where employees and students are really struggling. To give you an idea, what we're seeing, let me share a recent study by UC Davis. So this came out not too long ago, and it showed that California Jews are reporting significantly greater mental health symptoms since October 7th, 2023. In fact, it showed a 30% increase in depressive symptoms and a 45% increase in anxiety symptoms. And additionally, 60% of the participants in the study reported having an experience an anti-Semitic incident, such as having their synagogue vandalized. And this was really a key factor in the development of their mental health symptoms. And these lived experiences and resulting mental health symptoms are impacting Jews in our workplaces and our schools and beyond. And this, this really makes sense. And it kind of confirms what we've seen anecdotally. Anti-Semitism has risen exponentially in this country, and it's been very harmful to the Jewish community. Many Jews are feeling isolated, scared, and stressed out. Many describe losing friends and having to make changes in their lives due to anti-Semitism, from like minor things like changing daily routines or not engaging in activities or groups that they previously enjoyed, to more major things like quitting jobs and transferring their kids from one school to another because of anti-Semitism. And some Jews aren't feeling safe to bring their full identity as Jews. And I'll add, even more so, we're seeing as Israeli Americans into their workplace, schools, and elsewhere. Some are hiding their Jewish identity entirely. So basically, the conflict, like this conflict thousands of miles away, is being put on the shoulder of Jews in this country. And this really adds to the other environmental factors that Jews have always experienced in the workplace and schools, like not getting time off for important holidays, being left out of celebrations of identity and culture, and really like everyday microaggressions like jokes and comments that lean into stereotypes about Jews. And we know that widespread misunderstanding about Jewish identity persists. Stereotypes about Jews are being internalized, and this has led to negative and harmful behavior towards Jews. And so really, like, all of this makes joint presentations like the ones that we do even more powerful, because we're standing together with allies against these forms of bigotry that really have so much in common.
Exactly. And I think that's what people see when we do these panels together. So very much like Jewish experiences, one of the biggest challenges Muslims and Arabs face in schools and workplaces is the persistence of Islamophobic tropes, stereotypes, and misinformation. Muslim Americans report some of the highest levels of religious discrimination in the country. Over 60% experience bias because of their faith, more than any other group, and maybe not, Jewish Americans, just based on the stat that Karen just shared. In schools, 1 out of 2 Muslim students report being bullied. And last year, 64% said that they faced discrimination from adults in school. That's significant. On college campuses, 84% of Muslim students reported harassment in 2024, most often tied to their advocacy for Palestinian rights. These numbers, I think, are important. It's important for us to understand that these are not abstract issues. They reflect how Muslims are still seen mainly through the lens of extremism, terrorism, and Arabs as a single monolithic group. For Muslim and Arab students, that might look like teasing over their names, accents, attire, the hijab as you see me wearing, or practices like prayer and fasting. Many feel pressure to downplay their identities just to fit in. And while educators are often well-meaning, they often don't have the tools to properly address bias or to integrate Muslim and Arab contributions into what students learn. The workplace is not much different. Many employees have reported encountering limited awareness around basic accommodations, like flexible scheduling for Ramadan or a space to pray. At the same time, colleagues may carry misconceptions that show up as microaggressions, constant questioning, or even exclusion. And the result is that many Muslims and Arabs feel invisible or burdened with having to explain themselves again and again and again. And today, there's an even more urgent layer to all of this, and this is the rise of anti-Palestinian racism. Palestinians and those perceived as supportive of Palestinian rights are often silenced, stigmatized, or punished. In schools, that can mean discipline for wearing the keffiyeh scarf or simply talking about their heritage. In the workplace, it can mean retaliation, social isolation for speaking up about human rights. And this only adds to the already heavy burden Muslims and Arabs carry. The Interfaith Speakers Bureau responds to these realities by humanizing Muslim, Arab, Palestinian, Jewish, Israeli experiences through personal storytelling and why it's incredibly important to do this work together, because it builds empathy and it gives schools and workplaces the tools to create inclusive environments for all, spaces where diversity isn't silenced, but valued. So we want to leave you with something hopeful. Looking ahead, I hope personally that the Interfaith Speakers Bureau will expand its reach while deepening empathy and understanding across communities through the power of lived experiences. And my vision is for schools and workplaces to become spaces where Muslims, Arabs, Jews, Israelis, and people of all faith and backgrounds feel seen, respected, and included. By modeling dialogue and solidarity, the Interfaith Speakers Bureau can counter prejudice, nurture authentic relationships, and inspire a culture of belonging that strengthens our shared civic life. Karen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll just add that we've seen really the powerful impact that it can have. Even if it's just to have members of our Muslim and Jewish communities feel seen and heard and their stories elevated in settings where they aren't normally. We always have Jews and Muslims coming up to us after saying how much they appreciated just being represented in the school, in the workplace, and elsewhere. But we also hope that schools and workplaces will become more proactive. So not only in seeking out education and training about Muslims, Jews, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism, but also putting together proactive and sound policies that create an environment where diversity can thrive and workplaces and school problems are addressed quickly and appropriately before they become unmanageable. And I'll just mention that people on this webinar and in the community can help us in a few different ways. One is by personally committing to understanding and overcoming bias and helping others to do the same. And this is particularly important to do within the circles that you're part of, because that's where you really have a voice and have influence. It's very easy to call out bigotry on the other side of the political aisle or in groups that you're not associated with. But we have much less impact there than we do in our own, with our own family and friends and colleagues, team members, etc. So I think we're getting pretty close to time. So maybe we should close and let people know, Maha, how we can get directly involved with the Interfaith Speakers Bureau and the kind of work that we do.
Sure. So community members, educators, employers especially can get involved by inviting us into their schools, workplaces, and civic spaces, which will create opportunities for dialogue and learning. You can write to us at mail@ing.org, or you can visit our website at ing.org to schedule these panels. You can partner with us to host panels, workshops, or trainings that highlight lived experiences and to foster understanding. And just to echo what Karen said, that it's also important for you to amplify our message, challenge stereotypes in daily life, and personally commit to inclusive practices that value religious, ethnic, and cultural diversity, basically supporting American pluralism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maha and Karen, for what's such a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and also the great work that your Interfaith Speakers Bureau is doing, and also just being a great example on how working together we can really combat hate and all the different stereotypes. So thank you so much for being such a great example. And before I hand it over to Cece for public comment, thank you everybody for being with us. And please, I encourage everybody to speak up, ask questions, and this is your time and your opportunity. We want to hear from you. So Commissioner Filer, over to you.
Well, first of all, I also would like to thank everyone. I think that this has been a really important public forum, and I appreciate all of our speakers and all the work you're doing. And I've learned a lot myself today, so thank you, everyone. So again, just to review about our public comment period, the commission is a public body, and an important part of being a public body is hearing from the public. So we will now move into opportunities for our public to comment. To keep an orderly meeting, please make sure to comment only on the agenda item that our speakers recently presented on. Okay, there will, There will be an opportunity to comment on agenda items not on the agenda later on. You can submit a written comment by email, and I think we have that information up, or should we put that up again? If you would like to submit a written comment today, please submit it to the email that is up there. For everyone in the room today, you can also submit a written comment by emailing us or by writing a comment on a piece of paper if you're in the room where Erin is and handing it to Erin. If you submit a written comment that pertains to an agenda item, we will read it out loud and summarize it during this portion of the public comment period. If it is not related to our presenters, we will have to wait and do it under items not that were not specific to the agenda. If you would like to speak at the meeting to deliver your own public comment, you will have the opportunity to do so in a minute. We will begin with the people in the room with us today and then move on to the people on Zoom. If you are joining us on Zoom, you may request to speak on an agenda item by raising your hand virtually. To do so on a computer, please raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. In the interest of time, we will limit verbal public comments to 1 minute per person. If you require translation or accommodation, we will grant additional time. As you consider your comments today, we want to encourage you to keep a few things in mind. Everyone is encouraged to participate. The foundation of our work is community input, and we want to encourage you to speak up and have your voice heard. We want you to appreciate the diversity of perspectives. This forum was designed to support learning together and the creation of shared understanding. Everyone brings kernels of wisdom based on their own unique history and experiences. We can't know or understand what someone else thinks unless we listen to them. Therefore, when someone says something that challenges your thinking, we encourage you to listen, to understand why they think the way they do. Also, please maintain a respectful space. Everyone is deserving of respect. That means I encourage everyone to treat each other with kindness and respect today, even if we might disagree. So let's begin the public comment period. Erin, first we're going to start with Erin, I think, in the room.
Hi, there is nobody currently in person.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Erin. So why don't we now move to Rebecca? Rebecca, do we have any public comment on Zoom?
No current public comment on Zoom. If anybody does want to comment, they can raise their hand. No comment on Zoom at this time, though.
Okay, why don't we give a second? Are there any raised hands?
No raised hands on Zoom.
Okay. Do we have any emailed in public comments?
No emailed public comment.
Okay. Well, then why don't we move into allowing, at this moment in time, our commissioners to give any public comment if they would like to. And I don't see who went first.
Russell was first.
Okay.
Commissioner Roybal rather.
Roybal, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and make any public comment you would like to.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer, and thank you to Commissioners Filer and Cuellar for putting together yet another amazing community forum. I actually have a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. So thank you to all the speakers. It was really wonderful, and as Commissioner Filer said, I learned a lot. As someone who grew up in the San Gabriel Valley public education system, I was very excited to hear the work that the Western Justice Center is doing in Azusa, where I have family, and I wonder if there is um, do you have expansion plans for other, Elisa, do you have expansion plans for other districts in the San Gabriel Valley? It's so exciting, like what you're doing. So I have a question about that, and then it really sounds like you're addressing what I think a lot of us care about, which is the school to prison pipeline by engaging young people in how to do these circle practices. So I would love to hear kind of more about that. And as the data, I don't know if you have enough longitudinal data around whether that is affecting the that kind of rate, like the interactions with law enforcement I saw you mentioned are down, but does that mean also that the number of young people being incarcerated is also down, in particular in communities of color, which I'm sure the districts you're working in are probably majority students of color? And then my question to Maya is about the work. My original career path was in residence life, and I wonder if there are how you have been doing that work with resident assistants, and I think that's so important, especially as for a lot of young people coming into a college. Is it part of the first year experience program, or do you have plans around that? And then the last thing I'll say, and then I will shut up, is I hope that in the next version of the Commission's annual report, that some of this data that Elisa and Maya have could be included in the report, and certainly resources or recommendations that are part of the report include some of this work and include the work that that Karen and Maha talked about with the Interfaith Speakers Bureau. Everything today was so valuable, and thanks again to Commissioners Filer and Cuellar for putting it together, and for all the speakers.
Maya, do you want to jump in first? Are you okay with my starting?
Go for it, whatever you prefer.
Okay, thank you, my friend. Commissioner Roybal, Azusa proud. So excited. SGV, love having you on this commission. Wonderful to connect. Yes, Azusa is our cornerstone district. We started working there before the pandemic. We're in year 6. We have 2 replication districts so far. We're working with Pasadena Unified, which is a TK through 12, and El Monte City School District, which is a pre-K through 8. And we're on the doorstep of a 4th district project. We're doing an exploratory initiative also in the San Gabriel Valley. Another way that we've been working is developing a train the trainer model. So we're doing these really deep, in-depth, longitudinal partnerships with the districts because really, you know, culture eats policy and research for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so kind of cracking the code on implementation is really important. And I think you only do that when you roll up your sleeves and you get into community with folks. But the second model that we're looking at, we've been piloting with the LA County Dream Resource Centers, which are a collaboration of LA versus Hate, 211 LA, which includes a non-law enforcement based line for reporting hate incidents and hate crimes, and Helpline Youth Counseling, so Helpline Youth Counseling is on the ground, and then we've trained them in how to create a student-led peer mediation program, how to train students and adults in leading restorative and community building circles, and so that's another model, and we have a number of community-based organizations. We're all working with majority BIPOC student populations. So we have a number of folks that have reached out to us. Our Dream Resource Centers are widely spread across the county. Inglewood, Cerritos, Norwalk, La Puente. And then we do have about 40 schools that come to our annual Youth Peace Building Summit. It's called the Peer Mediation Invitational. The next 2 dates are coming up on February 10th and 17th. And 2026, you all are warmly welcome to join us for that. I think in terms of plans for expansion, we also have a website where we have online curriculum. It's called schooltools.info. It was created a few years ago, and it's a little bit the technology and the curriculum and content need updating. But that's the other thing that we're really thinking about. You know, the teaching standards were updated in 2024 to include a focus on social emotional learning and strategies that educators can use around connection in the classroom. We also have the passage of AB 2895, which is about having the California Department of Education track evidence-based best practice examples of implementing restorative practices and conflict resolution strategies in K through 12 education, particularly when they are integrated with MTSS, which stands for Multi-Tiered Systems and Supports, PBIS, which stands for Positive Behavioral Intervention Strategies, and very importantly, as an integrated part of the California Community Schools Partnership Program. So all of the districts that we're working with right now are part of that Community Schools Initiative, and we are an integrated component of that. So we're really excited to work with you all on having this data show up in your report, resources and recommendations, because we really believe that conflict resolution education needs to be a central and integrated part of education statewide in California. We're building the model in Southern California. We really think it needs to go statewide, but we need to be intentional about how we do that process. In terms of breaking the school to prison pipeline, no, I think that very rightly, the focus of funders and policymakers has been on the prison end of the pipeline. It's where the highest level of trauma is. And I know you all know about the sort of receivership discussion about Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall in LA. And the establishment of the Youth Development Department. I mean, there's a lot of things happening and a lot of innovations and challenges, you know, that we're focusing on the end, re-entry, wraparound services. I think, though, if we only ever focus on that high trauma endpoint of the pipeline, we're just going to be needing to tend to that symptom rather than addressing the root cause, which really requires an investment at the stage of prevention and early intervention. So I think we are in partnership with Cal Poly Pomona, actually just scheduled our next research meeting with Dr. Dana Mitchell, who is a leader in the EDD program there. And that is the next piece of data I think that we're going to be looking at is some of those elements that you identified. We know what's happening within the context of the school campuses. How is that translating into some of these other questions that connect into our criminal justice system?
Thank you.
I'm happy to address the other question, if that's all right, Commissioner Filer.
Yes, please jump in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Commissioner Roybal, also for that question. I love a good, anyone who has any history in residential life, I have so much admiration and respect for you because those are the best people to work with and they're just wonderful. And I'll just say a word about how we're thinking about integrating dialogue skills into the student experience writ large. At a university as enormous as UCLA, we have to be pretty strategic about both what it means to go broad and what it means to go deep. And also about creating various different touch points. Like we often think about orientation as like the culture setting place for students, and it's absolutely fundamental. And what happens the other, 3 years and 10 months and what I don't know the amount of time, but the rest of their time there. So we're trying to think what are different touch points throughout the student experience. And so on one level, what we did in our first year was create a number of different opportunities. It's open workshops, at least once a quarter, where any student from the first year undergraduate to graduate student to professional student can come and experience a skill building opportunity. And then afterwards, now we're starting to think about open part 2 sessions for those who are really invested, who really want to go deep, right? These are like the top leaders, the future leaders in the bridge building space. An example student in that case is someone who we got to know 2 years ago, who was an RA, who was already a leader on campus, and she went through some training with us. She ended up becoming an intern, and then she ended up applying for our Bruin Bridge Builders Fund to do a training with her RA colleagues, with fellow students, based on what she had learned. So we were able to provide that deep experience for certain student leaders. We then have broader opportunities for people to engage. So now we're starting to be targeted to meet students where they're at. So I mentioned just yesterday doing a training with all of the student staff of residential life. And we're thinking about more ways we can go to the spaces where students are in partnership with our student affairs colleagues. So it's funny that Elisa mentioned Train the Trainer, because that's something that we've been involved with as well, is supporting student affairs staff who are dealing with and supporting students every day to be able to teach these skills themselves. So we've now put a number of student affairs staff through a specific dialogue across difference, Train the Trainer, and now they're brainstorming, and they've already started. The ones who participated last year are already starting to incorporate these skill sets into their leadership academies, which is an initiative of the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs. I have one colleague who's looking at using this with Greek life and applying this to students who are in Greek life. We're thinking about, well, there's the other side, I guess I should name, there's the student life and student affairs side of the experience, and there's the curricular side of the student experience. And so on the curricular side, we're in conversation with our Division of Undergraduate Education about what are the requirements in the first year, what are the general education requirements, and where are the places where dialogue skill sets can be infused. We have writing faculty who've gone through our faculty fellowship who are conceptualizing what a writing requirement that understands, that incorporates dialogue skills into the writing requirement might look like, for instance. And then finally, I should just name, well, two last examples. One, student groups. We actually want to uplift students who are already leading the way in fostering dialogue themselves. So part of our forthcoming dialogue inventory, our mapping, is understanding who are the student clubs that exist that have a dialogue focus that new students could join if they're interested. So we already know there's a group called Common Ground Collective, and there's a group called Bridges USA that's a chapter of a national organization. For instance, we have students interested in interfaith work that we might connect with other interfaith interested students, right? And then finally, we're supporting and contributing to system-wide capacity building opportunities. So we just contributed to a UC-wide first-year student training, online training on dialogue and discourse at the UC that is required now of all new freshmen across the entire UC system. And will soon be required of all students at the UC system. So that is, that's the breadth, that's rather than the depth. I mean, we hope to still be deep in the content that we're providing, but it's an online virtual training, which is of course different from that student who I talked about who went through a really deep experience. But the point is, we're trying to cast a really wide net and find all of the different entry points, those sort of almost acupuncture points, where we can start to build culture change and build these skills into the student experience. So thank you for that question.
Thank you to both of you.
Chair Levin, would you like to?
Yes, thank you so much. What beautiful presentations. I want to just quickly thank you, Commissioner Filer and Commissioner Cuellar, for doing such a beautiful job time after time after time. So thank you for that. this discussion today harkened back to a couple of things that I recall. One was from Reverend Vivian, who did a lot of things and led the Southern Christian Leadership Conference after Dr. King's assassination. And also two women. I think it's very interesting that the promoters of peace that we are listening to today are all women. Perhaps we should have more respect and access to leadership for those who are doing such a beautiful job with peacemaking. And indeed, one of the things that, and this reminds me, particularly when I was listening to the interfaith speakers, harken back to the 1976 Nobel Prize winners, Betty Williams and Mary Corrigan. Mary Corrigan's nephews and niece were killed in an IRA incident, and Betty Williams was a witness. And they came across group lines to work for a People's Campaign for Peace. And they were awarded the 1976 Nobel Prize for their efforts. And then eventually, peace did come to that region. And the key takeaways were oftentimes it starts from the ground up, not from the elite down, and it starts locally. So, and we had at Cal State a dialogue across divide where we brought people from both domestically in Europe and the Near East. So I so applaud the continuation of these multiple efforts across different strata, which leads to my question, though, about the difficult times that we're in. And that is, how does one, when we are building locally and from the ground up, address the exogenous headwinds that come from an overall glorification of aggression, misinformation, and frontal attacks on dialogue? For instance, we've seen the destruction of the United States Institute of Peace, the demolition of the Community Relations Service nationally. So how do we at one time address these headwinds culturally, but also institutionally, when the bigger, if you will, more broad institutions are under attack, and we are in an atmosphere and a milieu where conflict and misinformation seems to be rewarded? And I will listen to anyone that wants to opine on that. And once again, thank you for your efforts and the marvelous presentations you made today to our commission.
Any of our panelists want to tackle that question?
I'm happy to, and I'm also happy to see if others want to go first.
Why don't you go ahead?
I mean, I almost laugh at myself for taking this question because it's such a huge and important one, and a baffling one sometimes. But I'll just say it's not a laughing matter, especially, you know, we at UCLA are currently dealing with the suspension of millions of dollars in grants. We have very real political realities stressing our university system right now. And so, of course, the headwinds tear us apart. But I could maybe share how we had a very similar question from some students yesterday who said, like, what do I do? You know, I understand the importance of like reflecting back to make sure I understand someone who's different from me. But what happens if they're saying hate speech or misinformation? Like, what do I like? Do I understand them then? This is still in the interpersonal. It's not quite at the macro level you're talking about, Chair Levin, but still significant. And I think I have multiple answers for that. At the interpersonal level, I said to them, first is to know your goal and to know your role, which I take from Resetting the Table. They often say that. It's to know, what are you trying to achieve and who are you in the system to achieve it? So if in that moment, and I'm speaking to the student who asked me a question, if you want to share what was harmful to you about that speech, and your role is such, if you're an RA and your role is such to be able to mediate a conflict, and you feel like you have the capacity to do that, then it's important to first reflect back to that person that you see and hear them, right? That you see them, that you see where their intention is. To say, make sure that they are actually receptive to you, that they know that you understand and see them. Then and only then can you come in and say, actually, that is hateful, or actually, I don't subscribe to those facts. To me, that feels like misinformed, and let me tell you why. To model, we can't control what the other person will do or how they'll react, but we can model the type of interaction and society we seek to build. That's on the interpersonal level. And I think that there's also a sort of, well, I'll say two last things. One is that there is a self-interest that we can name when it comes to building these skills, that we can say, maybe you want to advocate for something. Maybe you want to convince people who don't already agree with you. Maybe that's your goal. And even so, the skills to navigate difference, the skills to talk to people who don't agree with you are still important, are still fundamental. And then finally, and this is where, this is an incomplete answer, but I take it from a peace activist in the Israel-Palestine conflict, longtime peace activist, who says hope is an action. It is not just believing that things will be better. It is when things feel bleak, when it feels like the headwinds are going in the wrong direction, that we continue to commit and to recommit to the world in which that we wish to see, and the world that we want to live in. So it requires sort of that recommitment. And finally, remembering those misperceptions. And that's not being naive, right? That's not being naive about what feels like an attack. That's not being naive about misinformation. It's not being naive about power and aggression and all of these things, but it is allowing ourselves to be human too, and allowing ourselves to recognize the humanity even in those who are fundamentally different from us. It's I think it's John Powell who says to be soft on people, hard on power, or hard on policy. And to me, that's another sort of approach and wisdom that I try to practice.
Thank you, Mai. Any of the other speakers like to comment on Chair Levin's question?
Karen, did you want to comment? I don't have anything profound to say, honestly, other than just to sort of begin by saying that the political environment is never an excuse not to do work on peace building and bridge building. The more challenging, the more there is a need for us to do bridge building and peace building. The answer to your question, your specific question, really depends on the case, on the issue. It has to be very tailored. It has to be done quite sensitively. On the Palestinian-Israeli conflict right now, there's a lot of work that is happening behind the scenes. I may not initiate something that I know my community is going to react to because they just don't understand. They don't have the relationships that I've built over the years. And, they may see it as, working against their interest, when it's just the opposite. I'm working, but yeah, so relationships have to exist before you can actually do any kind of bridge building. And so the answer to the question, Brian, really depends on on the circumstances, on the specific issue, and you have to be very strategic and be quite sensitive to the people that you are representing. You can't just do it the way that you think you should do it or it should be done. There is no one way of doing this work. It has to be very tailored to the specific issue. And so that's the answer to the question. It's it's not profound, but that's the answer that I have for you. Karen, did you want to add anything as far as our experience over the last 2 decades is concerned?
Sure. I mean, I would just say one is that maintaining, it seems small, but maintaining personal relationships, doing things individually, one by one, headwinds will change. Our world is cyclical. And there will come a time when we can go broader and deeper and more public with this work. And so maintaining and holding on to the spaces where you can do this is really, really critically important. The other kind of nugget I'll just take away is that a lot of times, a lot of the issues that we are seeing, and I think this was alluded to before, are communication issues. People are talking past each other. They're not speaking the same language. Even the same word means different things to different people. So I'll just say when I enter into a dialogue or a discussion and there's, different words and terms and phrases thrown out, first thing I ask is, what do you mean by that? Let's clarify. Let's get on the same page before we can even open up a conversation. And I just see that everywhere. And I just think that's, a really important piece to keep in mind when we're trying to have any kind of conversation.
Thank you. Elisa, did you want to add something?
My goodness, it's difficult to have anything to add to that. I'll just share two things. One, I have a longtime mentor who says, when faced with the overwhelm in terms of how to respond to events in our world, ask yourself, what can you do and what can you do? What can you do and what can you do? I think also, and I think this is very important, we're talking a lot about relationships. And I think a lot of times the focus is on that crisis point, that inflection point when we're all trying to race to respond. But just like we talked about that 80-20 point, the investment has to be for the times where it's not happening. I want to call out the work of another colleague of ours in Southern California, Aziza Hassan, and Andrea Hodos at Newground, Jewish Muslim dialogue group. And they're really, I think model this piece that we pull from both the Torah and the Quran, that we must continue the work and we know that we're not going to finish it, but we're not free to desist. And so I think that's these investments that we make. This is not a short-term return prospect, right? These are generational investments that we make.
Yeah, well said. Commissioner Che, did you have a comment, question? Go ahead.
Yes, well, I had my hand up earlier and then it was actually Chair Levin who asked the question that I was going to ask, so thank you. But I think your comments also prompted a follow-up question, which is that, well, first, thank you for the work that you do. And I just want to recognize Maha because I had the privilege to work with Maha in the post 9/11 environment. And I'm so thrilled to know that you are continuing to do important work. And this panel really does give me a lot of hope. That's really difficult to do right now in this environment. And I think the thing that has struck me is that many of the solutions that you're talking about are long-term investments. It's about learning basic skills in terms of difficult conversations that we need to have, starting with young people, especially. But I do want to also note that it is important to acknowledge institutional bad actors that are making it difficult for us to have honest conversations. So attacks on our ability to understand each other's history, the targeting of undocumented people, and I think about the ways in which the work that you're doing is really helping to inoculate and to build resiliency skills, because I think obviously this isn't anything new, but this certainly is unprecedented, and certainly in my lifetime. And so both can be true. It's just the world that we live in. We have to acknowledge all those things at the same time. And more investments on interpersonal efforts are going to be important, but we also need to do more on an institutional level to address the systemic harms that are creating this environment. So I just want to say that, and just a lot of gratitude, and thank you for giving me a lot of hope today.
Thank you. Can I just jump in and say that this is why it's incredibly important to do this work across religious groups and across ethnic groups. And I didn't realize this. I should have realized it sooner, but I didn't. It didn't really hit me until Black Lives Matter movement. And regardless of what you think of that movement, that was sort of my wake-up call to say that, boy, we need to be rooting Islamophobia in anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism. If African Americans haven't been able, if African Americans are continuing to face the problems that they are, why the hell do we think that Muslim Americans and Arab Americans are going to do any better, right? I should have realized that a long time ago, right? We were already doing interfaith work. We started that work in, as I mentioned earlier, in 2005, but after Black Lives Matter, that's when it really made me aware that we need to be actually rooting everything in anti-Indigenous and anti-Black racism. And that's exactly what we do now. We also have an intercultural speakers bureau that does that work across the different ethnic groups. And it's a very, very powerful panel. We do this work in law enforcement agencies and corporations, and I'm hoping to scale that bureau as much as much as we do. And I include Jews and Muslims in that panel because both of our groups have been racialized, and that's why it's important to include Jews and Muslims in that conversation as well. But so thank you, Commissioner. And when you came and spoke, you spoke about Asian American and their experiences under COVID. And that panel was just absolutely brilliant. And that's the kind of work that I think we need to be doing more of, despite what's happening at the federal level. I just wrote a piece about the importance of DEI work in education about our history. And I'm going to continue to push that, even if I get resistance. I don't know what's going to happen by the federal government or whoever's going to come after the organization, but I'm going to continue to push the work because it's important work to do. And I better stop here.
And thank you. I see Commissioner Suthers. Did you have a question, comment?
Well, first of all, kudos and just thank the incredible panel we had this afternoon. This was just absolutely wonderful. And Commissioners Cuellar and Filer, every time you do a panel, a community forum, it's outstanding and you raise the bar. The next one is even better. So just thank you so much. I do want to say a couple things. I'm going to publicly apologize to Ms. Barrett, who probably may not remember, but about 4 years ago, I reached out in an email and you responded and we were going to connect. And I was a professor at the center at the time. And since that time, I got swept into administration. So I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I haven't lost touch. But thank you. We do have to connect. And I appreciate you saying, and boy, do I understand that culture eats policy for breakfast, especially policing culture. And so that's the question I'm going to ask. I was on a panel when I first came to this commission on recommendations for law enforcement. And I believe that Ms. Ferdman actually mentioned the 211 LA line. I'm really proud of the work this commission has done on AB 449. We have a video that's out trying to educate everyone, not just law enforcement, but the community about reporting crimes and the hate crimes. And the difficulty we have is obviously in data. I serve on the LA Police Commission. I'm not going to be naive enough to think that people who are victims of hate crimes are calling the police to report them. And that's a huge problem. So my question is, as I really emphasize as a commissioner in my other role, alternatives to armed response, alternatives to police response, you've got this 911 LA line. What are you seeing that's been successful in getting people to trust a line to call if they are in fact victims of a hate crime or want to report some activity that perhaps fits into that category that should be responded to? And I'll take an answer from anyone.
Yeah, as a Western Justice Center, as is a member of the LA versus Hate Rapid Response Network, and have had the honor of working very closely with LA County Human Relations Commission Executive Director Robin Toma. I think what I understand from the quarterly gatherings and the data that they share with us, and if you wanted to do a follow-up and you haven't had Director Toma on, I think he's just a font of information. But what we're seeing is sometimes people feel that they don't get a full listening when the crime is reported directly to the police. Or it might be that the police are juggling a lot of priorities and they don't see this as a crime in the same way they regard other crimes. So sometimes that's a factor. Sometimes police may be involved in the issue. And sometimes there is a general perception of law enforcement based on someone's nation of origin or cultural experience. And so what we're seeing when people call into 211 is they don't have that level of anxiety. They've already experienced a traumatic event. They're dealing with someone who's coming at this from much more of a supportive services and social work context, right? So we not only need to document what's happened and make sure it gets reported to the appropriate body, which might be law enforcement, but we're also identifying services and supports that individual can be anything from medical care, it might be housing, it might be mental health support, or that person may be in a precarious position otherwise and needs support. So in the Dream Centers, where we're working with Helpline Youth Counseling and 211 LA, we're doing that on high school campuses. So students are getting the empowerment, but they also are learning about how to access the service. So that's some of what we're seeing. And in terms of policing culture and data and some of the other things that you mentioned, I'd like to also recommend another colleague of mine and Maya's, Dr. Shafan Roberts, who's I don't know if his new title, but he's sort of the second in command over at the Strauss Institute for Conflict Resolution at Pepperdine Law School. He's also on the board of the Western Justice Center, so I am a little bit biased in his favor. And he did his doctoral work on large data analysis into the factors that go into community-based trust or loss of trust in law enforcement. And also through the Strauss Institute, he does de-escalation and other training with law enforcement. So I think he would be a really great resource. And I look forward to a potential panel on that issue.
Thank you so
And
much.
we should definitely get together and break bread.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to make any comments? Okay, I don't think there's any other, no, the commissioners that had their hands up had their hand, we've already addressed their questions and comments. So I think what we're going to move into now is the next item on the agenda, which is public comments for items not on the agenda. And I think David, okay, great. So the commission may not discuss or act on any matter raised during the public comment section that is not included on the agenda, except whether to decide to place that matter on the agenda for future meetings. So right now, Rebecca, do we have any public comment on Zoom?
No public comment on Zoom.
Okay. Aaron, do we have any public comment in the room?
No public comment in the room.
Okay, Rebecca, do we have any emails?
No email public comment.
Okay. Well, commissioners, this is also an opportunity if there is a comment you would like to make other, something that was not on the agenda. So any of our commissioners? I don't see any hands. Oh, Chair Levin.
Just briefly wanted to make sure, and I'll send an update to all the commissioners through the department. The latest data came out with regard to hate crime in 2024 from the FBI, and it was quite consistent with what was presented to our commission. The multi-city study showed a 1.8% decline off a record in 2024 and elevated levels of religion hate crimes. The FBI data showed a 1.5% decline, and including records in religion hate crime, and certainly historically elevated levels as well. So I just wanted to bring that up because it shows just how timely the wonderful skills, advice, and modeling that we're getting today. In other words, this is not an abstraction. What our panelists have done and this wonderful subcommittee has done continues to be critically important. And again, if I can reiterate, especially at a time when partners at the federal level have now gone by the wayside and in some instances become antagonistic. So if there was ever events and data that show just how important all of your work is, it just keeps coming in. So I wanted to again thank you not only for your work when things are easier, but for your work when things are difficult, because that is when we need it the most. And if we build 1,000 gardens, eventually that can change the culture. And I'm so appreciative to this subcommittee and the just marvelous panelists, because your work is needed now more than ever, and we should promote it from the top of the mountains. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm going to just, jump on what you said, Chair Levin. Thank you to everyone on our panel today, because really the work you're doing, and I'm so glad that we did this, and we'll be able to include all the work you're doing in our annual report to the governor, because I think it's really critical and important that everyone gets to hear what you guys are doing for our state in each of your areas. I'm going to hand it over or hand it back to Regina at this point.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Filer. And thank you again to all the presenters and everybody attending, all the public who stayed on, and again, all the commissioners who joined us today. This was a great forum, and I'm looking forward to the next forum. And again, hope everybody has a great weekend, and please stay safe out there and share love, not hate, right? And this meeting is adjourned at 4:26. Thank you.